We're back with details, and this time we're on Main Street in the Main Street Confectionery. Come with me as we look over at this picture here over on the side. It reads World Columbian Exposition. This was the 1893 World's Fair. It was held in Chicago, and it turns out there's something of a backstory to Main Street involving this fair. You can see some of that backstory right here in the confectionery. All of these little doodads and machineries that you see in the ceilings, well, this was meant to be a representation of all that was newfangled and the machinery and such that was visible at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. It takes form most spectacularly in the confectionery, where we look at this machinery overhead, the candy conveyance, which was meant to be like the machinery you would see in the World's Fair. Let's head up the road to Crystal Arts. Now this shop was once partly the market house, and as such they have all of these artifacts and props left over. They look like things you might find in a market house, typewriters and that sort of thing. Among the artifacts in here is a World's Fair cup, or World Exposition cup from Chicago. The artifacts on the walls in this store are actually pretty interesting. Among them is a reference to Orlando Ferrante, who was an Imagineer who had worked on the Main Street redo of this shop. But there are also photos of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, actual photos taken of the fair itself. This fair is also historically significant because Walt Disney's father, Elias Disney, had once worked as a carpenter on this fair, so perhaps it was something near and dear to Walt's heart. Sometimes the props are pretty small, actually. Let's look up here, high up on this shelf in the display cases. It turns out this is a stereoscope, like we see in the Carousel of Progress, and the image on the stereoscope is the main building from the Chicago World's Fair. Not everything in the store has to do with the World's Fair. There's occasionally time for a hidden Mickey or two, of course. It's worth it to pause and look at all of the hanging artwork around the store just to see what connection there might be to the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Obviously, the theme that's implied here is that the proprietors of this store were part of the 1893 World's Fair and then set up shop here on Main Street a few years after that, Main Street, of course, being set around the turn of the century. Here are those proprietors, and in the picture between them is the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, once again a photograph from the actual fair buildings. It's not clear that most visitors are going to stop and look at these pictures, but they're there to lend authenticity to the environment around. One last stop on Main Street having to do with the 1893 World's Fair. This is in City Hall. It's behind the counter, and let's have a look at the machinery in the back there. It's a coreless machine, and this debuted at the 1893 World's Fair, where there was a lot of exhibits having to do with automation and the machine age. We see mention of the coreless machine actually as well in the American Adventure over in Epcot, but its presence here in City Hall implies that this is yet another reference to the 1893 World's Fair, which had just recently happened and is on everybody's minds on Main Street because it was only a few years ago. Therefore, Main Street's theme is not just simply 1900 America, but a 1900 America that is informed by stuff that actually happened a few years prior.